Welcome to Internally Guided Life, a podcast to help you unlock a life of balance, fulfillment, and joy. I'm Kayla Sweet, and together we are going to have fun and create change from the inside out. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome back. Today we are in for a special treat. I am actually here with my husband to have a conversation about burnout. Everything burnout. Burnout at an individual level, what it looks like in organizations, and how we've supported each other. This is something that's very close to home for both of us and something that we're both continuing to stay involved in efforts to reduce in the world. So I'm super excited to have this conversation and to have my husband as my very first guest on this podcast. Welcome, Chris. Go ahead and give yourself an introduction.
Hey, thank you, Kayla. My name is Christian Smith, and I'm an artist and a musician. I've always used the workplace environments to help subsidize my creativity and keep myself afloat while working. That way I don't burn out.
So we're here to talk about burnout today. Obviously, this is something that we've both experienced, so I want to dive into what it means to each of us. We have very different perspectives, different life experiences, different educational experiences that have brought us to this point, and yet we have this shared experience of burning out and supporting each other through burnout. So, Chris, I would love to hear from you first, because this is something I talk about a lot in my professional work these days. But what does burnout really mean to you at a personal level?
Burnout for me is the inability to function in a day-to-day setting, whether it be at home or it can impact your work. And part of burnout for me was only allowing it to impact me outside of work. So I had to perform constantly in a work setting and push everything aside, my personal health, my mental well-being, and I've learned that it affects every facet of your life. The high stress environment definitely took its toll. With me in burnout, after a while I could not function. I could not walk. I would get home and sleep for hours and hours, and you would get home and I would just be waking up or trying to pretend like, oh, I'm okay. But I knew that something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong, because I couldn't show up for myself. And I could not create art. I could not create music. I could not involve myself in things that I love outside of our relationship. And that in itself was another effect that exacerbated my burnout, is because I felt just so helpless, so hopeless.
You bring up something that's really important, which is that we often see the negative consequences of burnout at home first, because many of us are able to put on some kind of persona or mental barrier of sorts, so that we try to block out that emotional experience and that exhaustion and that stress to continue to do what we have to do at work. And I had a similar experience when I started to burn out. Nobody at work knew, but Chris here, my husband, you knew as soon as I started to have those signs, because they were showing up at home, because I wasn't showing up as present for our relationship, because I was more irritable, I was having trouble sleeping, all of those things. And similarly for me, watching you starting to go down that same path a few years later, the restlessness at home, the struggles to really be present, because when you're bringing this stress from a workplace home, it does impact everything. And eventually, the further you progress, it's going to impact your ability to thrive in a work environment, but it's usually the people closest to you that really know the extent of what's going on. So I'm glad you bring that up. I'll just share a little bit about like what burnout means to me, both on a professional level, because this is the realm I work in, coaching women who are experiencing this, and then also for me at a personal level. So I obviously know all of the textbook definitions for burnout, and essentially it's a stress syndrome. It happens when we are stressed out for a long time and we haven't been able to effectively process it and manage it, and it's especially severe when we have the ongoing stressors day after day after day that aren't really improving. So that can contribute to it because it's hard to process and move forward when you're continuously bombarded by the stressful stimuli day after day. So the way that shows up for people is emotional exhaustion, cynicism, negative attitude, resentment, frustration, irritability, and eventually your work is impacted in a negative way. But I noticed that personal relationships tend to be impacted first. There's strain there because we're so stressed out. For me personally, when I burned out, I didn't know all of that language when that was happening to me. I didn't know that it was happening until it was like full blown in full force. But for me, it was that just full exhaustion. It was when I came home to you and I had nothing left. I didn't have presence, I didn't have patience, I didn't have much capacity for my life outside of work. And the more severe that feeling got, the more I knew something was terribly wrong. And I felt guilt about that too, because I felt like I'm showing up for people at work and then I'm coming home and I have nothing left, and this isn't fair. It's not fair to me, it's not fair to you. So that was a little bit of how like burnout showed up in my life. It was those personal impacts that really made me have the fuel to change and to figure out what was going on and to leave an environment that wasn't working for me and to really double down on my personal healing. I had already started at that point, but I realized there was still a lot of work to do. Do you have any, observations about the differences between the way both of us experience burnout?
Yeah. What I saw in you was definitely the burnout. It wasn't necessarily irritability, but your fuse was a little short. And it's not that you were angry or being mean to me at all. You're a very wonderful, nice person. It's that I noticed that you did not have the capacity to really involve yourself in a relationship. And I was okay with that because in order for you to get past burnout, you learned. You were enveloped in learning about yourself, and you would read and study and write constantly. It was always about self-improvement, and that can exacerbate burnout because you're not willing to step back from what you're experiencing. You are enveloping yourself in the learning of burnout. And eventually, of course, you did kind of like, wow, this is what I'm experiencing. It's not just dedicated towards professions or environments where it's extremely stressful. It's through all places of employment, work. It doesn't matter if you're sitting at a desk or behind a cash register. It impacts everybody, and it impacts everybody differently. Some people will use, like me, music and art to really just kind of hone in, get past the societal issues in a workplace or around us, because everything impacts an individual's perception and the way that burnout develops within themselves. And you see these things in the world that really just compound the pressure that you feel. And that just further makes the snowball effect in burnout. Sometimes you get hopeless, you get helpless, you don't know what to do with the information from the world around you, and you internalize everything. You try to say, how can I make this world better? What am I doing wrong? Why can't I impact society and the people around me in a way that's beneficial for everyone? I'm still in a burnout type mindset. I'm still recovering, and it is not an easy process. Over time, these negative compounding effects truly do damage your cognitive and mental processing in a way that could take years, if not like months or years, just to get better. And for you to have my back and just say it's okay, and you do a very great job. It's wonderful to have such a support with you, because you see things in a way that put things into perspective for myself, and I'm sure that I put things into a certain perspective for you as well.
I think it was a huge blessing that we experienced burnout at different times because if we had both been burned out at the same time, the support we were able to offer each other probably would have looked a lot different. Thankfully, I burned out. Years later, you burned out, and we were able to hold space for each other while the other one was going through that. I can't imagine how challenging it would have been had we both been going through it at the exact same time. Burnout is a really complex problem. It seems simple when we just say it's about stress and managing stress, but there are so many far-reaching implications of the things that cause us stress that there are many levels at which intervention has to take place as we recover, and in environments, if we're going to stay in them, those environments have to look a certain way in order to facilitate that. So I like to think of burnout at an individual level. We can do certain things to manage our stress, to process it, to take care of ourselves and our relationships, to draw boundaries. There are things we can do. But all of those things become really hard if at a organizational level or a team level, the environments you're in are not psychologically safe. Because if you are not in an environment where you can advocate for yourself or draw boundaries or take care of yourself in those settings, it makes healing and recovery and processing of the stress impossible. So we can't fully put it on the individual, and we can't fully put it on the organization, and we can't fully put it on society, but all of these things have a place in this phenomenon. I think that's why it's so hard for us as individuals to move through it. Because even if we're addressing stuff at an individual level, there's these larger systems at play that are constantly impacting us, and we have to learn how to cope with them, and that's a hard task. We are living in a world where there's a lot of financial stress. Coming upon jobs that do facilitate psychological safety isn't as easy as we would like. I would be curious, I guess, what your thoughts are about the interplay between what we're able to do at an individual level and the impact of our environments, and when do we know that we have to remove ourselves from those environments to continue our healing?
When it comes to an individual, you have to process the information that is conducive to your healing. If the environment is not supportive, like say you as my wife are very supportive, the environment at a workplace has to be just as supportive. Whether the organization reflects on their fostering of an unsafe psychological workplace or not, there is an organizational liability that goes hand in hand with somebody's perception and the way they feel personally. And you, as my wife, feel very supportive, and you understand at an organizational level, those people are about numbers, and they do not necessarily advocate for an individual. And that is something that I believe has to change. There is no way that society can keep moving forward if the environments that we are forced in America to work and provide for ourselves are detrimental to our emotional and mental and physical well-being. It is not okay for a workplace to foster bullying or foster retaliation if you ask for accommodations. It's not okay if you have a work environment that is so stressful that when you come home, you automatically fall asleep. Or sometimes I would fall asleep in my car in the driveway. I was just so out out of it. And these high stress environments where you are supposed to perform and you do exceptionally well every day for your employer to perform, that you should say, hey, I do need accommodations. You should be able to say, look, I'm a high performing employee, but something's wrong here to where I need assistance and I need some sort of accommodation, whether that be an ADA accommodation or FMLA leave, to put yourself into a way to recover individually, especially if you realize that it is the work environment that is causing you harm. So then you have to say, well, what in those environments are causing the exacerbating effects of detrimental mental health or physical health? You have to be mentally capable of understanding where you are at as an individual and what is impacting yourself. So you remove yourself from all of these different environments and you say, well, I have worked so much on trauma throughout the years. I have recovered so much and I'm happy at home, but when I go to work, everything starts to just devolve. All of that years of trauma recovery starts to unravel and you start to realize, oh, this is impacting me. And if it's an organization that is fostering workplace harm, psychological abuse, that is a clear indicator that you need support in that organization. A lot of organizations provide therapy resources, or you can go to your supervisor and say, look, I am not feeling well and I might need support from you. Or you could go to HR and say, hey, look, these things are happening and we all want these representatives of an organization to understand us at our individual needs. They should be understanding of what we need to help our mental and physical well-being. When you don't get that representation or the support that you need, it's a clear indicator that you either have to fight and advocate for yourself or remove yourself. But I strongly suggest doing both. When you have an extremely stressful environment, it is going to cause physical effects.
The impacts of stress on our bodies over time are very physical because stress occurs at a physical level. So that's why we see such severe exhaustion and fatigue when we're dealing with stressors over time, is that it really is a physical impact as well as an emotional impact. And you brought up that it impacts all these other stressors in our lives, and it can also bring up previous traumas or previous wounding that maybe we've done some healing work on, but then when you're in an unsafe environment it can get reactivated. And I think the really important thing that is kind of highlighted beneath everything you just said is we need to create environments where workplaces, where organizations are accountable and responsible for the psychological safety and healing of employees, and that a workplace, because we spend so much time there, really should be a place where we could go to grow and learn and be supportive and evolve. And in the best case scenarios, it can be that, and I've experienced that firsthand. I've also experienced environments where that's not the case, and I know that you especially have experienced those other environments where workplaces are not taking responsibility for the employee health. And I think this is a shift that we are trying to make as a country. It's becoming more of a conversation. Psychological safety and employer responsibility is coming up as something that we need to have as a priority. Employee wellness is a conversation, but we are still so far behind in the actual implementation of this. We are starting to have the conversations, but on the ground floor, what's actually happening, and In what ways can we give people, these support people, people in HR, people in leadership, the skills to create these environments that are safe and really contribute to the well-being of individuals rather than retracting from it? It's a complicated matter. It's interesting. So Chris and I have both experienced burnout and very different factors that contributed to the burnout. So in my journey, when I was going through burnout, a lot of the things that were burning me out were self-inflicted. And I can see that now looking back, because I have had the incredible opportunity to work in environments that were geared towards supporting employees. They might have been high stress environments, but there were supports and safety nets for me within that environment. Didn't stop me from burning out, because I was my own worst enemy as an oldest daughter, as a woman who was a high performer, as somebody who had just a very strong sense of responsibility for others and didn't always know how to love myself as well as I loved other people. All of those things were what compounded for me. It was feeling like I could never do enough no matter how many hours I worked. It was feeling that my identity was so wrapped up in how well I could do and how much I could help others that there was no room left for myself, my own life, my own joy, my own happiness. And so that was stuff I had to come to reckon with myself and had to learn to empower and advocate for myself, to myself. I was my own worst enemy. And I think we see this on both ends of the spectrum with burnout. We see the stress of environments and the stress of society, and we also see the stress that we put on ourselves because we've been brought up in this world that has us expect certain things of us, or and hasn't really taught ourselves how to love ourselves well. So there's a lot going on here. I really want to talk a little bit, if you don't mind, Chris, if I shift gears, I want to talk a little bit about love. So we've loved each other through this burnout experience, and we've also had to deepen our relationships with ourselves. So I want to talk about love in two ways. I want to talk about relational love, whether that's in a romantic relationship or family relationship or friendship. There's all different kinds of ways we express love in relationship and can offer that support and healing container. And also, how do we love ourselves through this? How do we love ourselves through healing? How do we come to terms with the guilt and the shame and the frustration and the disappointment and recognize our worth and start to stand in that really clearly? So I'd be curious what your thoughts are on the impact of love, both at a self-love level and at a relational level. How has that impacted your healing process? How did that impact you during the burnout experience? What are your thoughts?
At the individual level, you have to love yourself and realize that you create your own support mechanism. And when you reinforce the foundation of your own support process, you could then transfer that to the support and love that you have for your loved one, whether it be a family member, lover, anybody. It could be a stranger. You could just love them and support them in ways that are so simple and just it's uplifting when you can support someone that truly cares and truly loves. And part of that is being absolutely honest and truthful. And if that is your foundation of support, it's never ending. Your foundation will never break. It is everlasting. For me, when I think about how you've supported me through this, is just allowing me to feel, that I have to be the one to make the change. You can't force anybody to get better, but you can support them and give honest and truthful feedback. Whether or not a loved one or family member is experiencing a tough time or experiencing workplace abuse, experiencing trauma, telling their story, you can give honest feedback that is not going to break an individual down or make them feel bad about themselves. And when you truly love and are truly compassionate towards your partner or friendship or family member, there is no way to break someone down. if you honestly love them. It's only, the love is based on truth, honesty, and respect. And using that to support someone through burnout, like, you internalized a lot, right? And I mentioned that, look, you're putting a lot on yourself. You were working a lot of hours, right? And then
like 55 hours
yeah,
plus, yeah.
you were working so much, and then you would just dive into your schoolwork, or during your master's program. You would take all this stress throughout the day, and then just boom, you would automatically start internalize everything and learning. That's how you try to heal your burnout, but it caused a compounding effect on your mental well-being. And eventually I was able to kind of help you realize that. And I supported you for years as I seen you working and just putting your mind to the brink and learning every day about yourself, about burnout, about the world around you. You did not stop until your mission was done. Until you had your degree, you weren't going to stop. So you put yourself into a state of burnout, but I think you knew at an individual level that you would come out of it. I knew that I had to support you through everything. Going through these motions and watching you stress yourself out and just trying to help you, whether it be just rubbing your feet, or we were doing like facial masks and just all sorts of things that would help you relax and help you calm down. There wasn't a lot of that time to do that because you were working constantly. Sometimes you'd be up until 1 or 2, 3 in the morning working, and you had to be up at 6 or 7. And I seen this, and I had no choice but to let you do it because I knew that was your way out. I knew that was how you had to process things. And the way you process things is through information, through knowledge, through learning. And it's who you are as a person. And I love that. That is love. That's an honest truth that you've shown me, is that there's no backing down to learning about yourself, learning about the world, learning about everything around you, and then interpreting that for yourself that can help and benefit others. That is what you'd call internally guided assistance, or I'd say internally guided love. It's something that's just immaculate, and you have to figure out what is driving yourself within in order to help others drive themselves.
Right. Well, and it's interesting hearing you reflecting back to me some of what I experienced in my burnout in those early days, because in some ways, you're right, I was trying to process through information. I also think I was over intellectualizing some things that I really needed to feel in my body, and it wasn't until I learned how to do that and start creating some space for that, and I got really into yoga for a while because it was an outlet that helped me to drop into the emotions as they lived in my body. Because it was very easy for me to dive into the information and try to collect it all and make sense of it. But when it came to my actual healing, I had to then take that information and apply it and give myself space and permission to slow down and to feel the grief and the stress at a physical level and to work through it at a physical level. And all of that was much harder for me. It's a lot harder to feel the pain of the stress than to read about how stress impacts the body. And that is something that it took me a while, and now I'm so grateful to be at a place where both my lived experience of healing and my intellectual and academic experience of information gathering have come to a peak where now I am capable of supporting others and helping others as they navigate their unique paths and figure out what works for them. But I will say, when it comes to love, and I love that you said internally guided love, I'm constantly finding new ways that this principle of being internally guided applies to our lives. But within the context of our relationship, I remember when I was experiencing burnout, the most helpful thing for me from you was when you would just hear me, just listen, and just be there. Like a hug felt like it could have saved the world in some of those days. Like there was no specific thing that you could have said. There's not even anything I remember as far as a specific comment that was more healing than your presence and your accepting of me while I was going through all of these challenges. And then I think what was hard for me years later when you are experiencing burnout was that I had to learn to put the information aside for a beat and not bombard you with it and be present for you in that same way, and to just hold that space for your truth to be seen and heard and recognized. And I think that's the hardest thing for anyone when you're in a relationship of love with someone else. That can sometimes be a barrier, is that we so badly want to jump in and fix it. We want to intellectualize it. We want to make it make sense. We want to solve it for the other person. But really the most healing thing that we can do and that we do for each other is to hold space for the truth of the experience and love people anyways.
It's beautiful the way that you've expressed that and the way that we've lived through it. It's amazing to be able to allow a presence and to allow each other to feel.
So as we get close to the end of our time, I just really want to talk about healing and being on the other side. Or maybe we're not fully healed. Maybe we're always in recovery from burnout. I know it's something I constantly have to keep on my radar. Am I loving myself well enough to not get back to that place? Am I processing the stress on the daily? Am I making that space in my relationship and in myself? But right now, where we're currently at, I want to talk about what healing looks like and what it feels like, and what maybe advice we could offer to any listeners who have experienced burnout, regardless of the reason. They've just experienced that compound stress. They're feeling that exhaustion. How can we use our healing to support the listener? So what are your thoughts?
Healing is a process, and it's a process that an individual has to feel good about getting over the hump, getting over the fact that, oh wow, you can't be in denial. A person cannot be in denial. You have to accept the fact that you cannot show up for someone you love. And on the other end, that lover or family member or friend has to accept the fact that they don't have the energy to show up for you. And that mutual understanding is going to help become a catalyst for healing. We have to be understanding that given the space, time, and effort of the process of healing, it will eventually coalesce. All of the effort from both parties will come together and eventually support each other. You will begin to uplift and help another. The healing process also is to be an advocate for yourself, is to say to yourself, look, I need people to understand and support me. And the people around you have to understand and support you, regardless of the information they have, regardless of how they want to fix something. They have to understand that sometimes it is just an ear. It is a listening session. It is just hugging someone. It is holding their hand until they are ready to speak. It is allowing a space for a story and truth to be told. and for compassion and love to show up to help that healing process. It's not always words that will get someone to think better about themselves. It's not always actions that will get someone to snap out of burnout. Sometimes there is no snapping out. Sometimes people just go through it, and maybe you would have to talk to your loved ones and say, what do I need to do personally? Do I have to go get support from a mental health organization? What do I need to do to help myself get better? The lover or friend or relationship, that individual has to support you, but also if they can't, because they've given you the ear, they've given you affection, they've given you everything they could, sometimes it's best to give that support to someone who is trained to support you.
Absolutely. And I think that really brings up the role of professional helpers within this recovery process. So there are certain things that we can do on our own and within the context of our relationships as we're healing. And sometimes, depending on the severity and the compounding factors, we do need support outside of those natural supports that are built in, because we're not all trained in how to hold space well for people, no matter how good our intentions are. So sometimes we may feel, no matter how much the people around us love us, we may feel that we're not getting everything that we need to help our healing process and to go within, because it is a very individual and personal experience. Everyone's burnout recovery journey looks very different. Yours and mine have looked very different. But there are professional supports that people can turn to. There are mental health supports such as therapists and psychiatrists. There are physical health supports, primary care providers, and there are coaches. And this is something that I'm very passionate about as someone who coaches women, especially in their burnout recovery journey. And I think it's important for you to know, if you do feel like you need support, there are some key differentiations on how to know where to get that support. So if you have trauma or a mental health diagnosis that is impacting your experience of burnout, you're going to want to see a licensed therapist. If you're having chronic pain or illness, things that are coming up because of the prolonged stress, you're going to want to involve a primary care provider to make sure that you are taking care of yourself at a physical level. And then if you are somebody that maybe is just at the beginning of burnout, or you're a very high functioning individual, but you can tell deep down that something is off, that something is causing you pain, and maybe it's not even super obvious to other people yet, a coach might be a good place to step in. Because what I offer as a coach is my experience, that I've gone through this, that I can walk alongside people as they are doing it because I've been there. I offer accountability, and I offer access to tools that people can use as they're taking control of their lives. I help people to think differently about themselves, to tap into that self-love, and to really focus on what is possible in their future. So if you have a lot of stuff from the past that's being dredged up, you have trauma, you're going to want to go to a therapist. If you are at a place where you are ready to make those mental and behavioral shifts now, and you really want to propel yourself forward, that's where a coach comes in. And some people need both at the same time. Sometimes you need therapy first and then a coach, or vice versa, depending on what you're dealing on. But eliciting the support of these trained professionals can really make the difference between struggling with this for years or struggling this for months. And the recovery process from burnout does range from months to years. I think the average is between 3 months and 3 years. That's a huge variance, right? Some people are recovering after a few months, and some people are literally taking years in their recovery process before they can get back to that physical baseline, that emotional health baseline. So honor your unique situation. If you're struggling with this, listen to your life experience, what you've needed, and get that support from anywhere you can, whether that's your personal relationships or professional supports. We can't do this alone, and we shouldn't have to. We all deserve to get support on these journeys.
And if you're experiencing burnout due to your work environment, I'd highly recommend just looking up your workers' rights, contacting a health professional, and asking, what can I do if I need leave from my workplace in order to get better? What can I do? And contact your employer, let them know, look, I'm consulting with a doctor and I may need to take leave. Understand those rights, and if your rights are being infringed upon, or if nothing is being done to help support you in these corporate or organizational environments, I encourage you to look up the Workplace Psychological Safety Act and understand what it does for a community and citizen-based society. Look at the benefits of what this can do to help your organization or help your employees within. That way you could truly understand the effects of workplace abuse and measures to help decrease the liability, to help support your employees. And I want to encourage everyone to go to endworkplaceabuse.com. Go figure out what you can do to advocate for yourself and really propel your healing process. Another resource is the Workplace Psychological Safety Act.org, and that will give you further resources and information on how to deal with these environments that really tear you down. And it's important that we resolve these issues, and hopefully we all can pray, meditate on this, is that our society will get better if we advocate and support things in government to make it better. Don't allow the naysayers, don't allow people to deny your truth, and really, really dive in to that healing process and think about everything that you can possibly do to help yourself or help a loved one stick their head out of their turtle shell, and really just advocate and get better through a very tough time when it comes to burnout or things that you're experiencing within yourself.
So, as we wrap up, we have had an amazing conversation. I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface, though, with these issues, to be honest. We could talk about this for hours, so we might have to do a part 2 at some point. But we've talked about burnout, how it impacts us at a personal level, how it's impacted our relationships, and some of those different factors in the workplace and society and in ourselves that cause this high stress that leads to burnout. As we say goodbye and we thank you for spending this time with us, I think we can each share maybe just one brief sentence to our listeners, one sentence or one statement. If you are struggling with stress, we want you to know this. I'll go first since I just put Chris under the spotlight. I would say one thing I want you to know, if you are struggling with stress, whether it's reached the point of burnout or not, is that you are worthy of the life that you want. You're worthy of joy, you're worthy of balance, and it is entirely possible if you take the steps to heal and create the things that you deserve in your life. It won't be easy, but it is possible. And I've experienced this personally. So if you're feeling that helplessness and that hopelessness, just know there is light on the other side of this rain cloud, and you just have to persevere for a little while longer to see it. Chris, is there any final thoughts you want to offer to the people who are listening?
Love yourself with truth and honesty. Allow yourself to heal. That way you can encourage others through truth and honesty to heal themselves. Ultimately, it is up to everybody at an individual level to help themselves and to help others. It is our responsibility to lend a helping hand and uplift everyone around us if we have the capacity to do so. Much love.
Thank you so much for joining us. I hope this was meaningful and beneficial for you. Take care of yourselves. Until next time. Thank you for listening. If you want more resources on thriving in your life or want details on working with me, check out my website at internallyguidedleadership.com or follow me on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at Internally Guided Coach. Be gentle with yourselves out there, and I'll talk to you next time.